So what is a test square? A test square is a concept that was primarily popularized in the early 90s thanks to the work of Herzog and Marshall, where they thought it would be a great idea that when assessing for hail damage to do a representative square on the roof. And the concept behind this is that rather than trying to observe an entire roof here for hail damage and count every single stone, what you could do is you could take a small portion of the roof that easily divided into the total square foot of the roof. Now, the common way nowadays, the common misconception is that that's supposed to mean a 10 foot by 10 foot area because it equals 100 square feet. While this was one of the recommended ways, it was not a rule. The concept is 100 square feet is easily dividable. You can put that into any section of the roof, make it real nice and easy to get the number. It's not a hard set rule, but it has turned into one sense. So the concept is generally 100 square feet. Easiest way to achieve this, of course, is a 10 foot by 10 foot test square. However, in some cases, a 5 foot by 20 foot can be appropriate, or as you're about to see here, we're going to do a little bit of a crooked square. And so I'm going to go over the two main types of test squares used. So the first one is just your common test square. And so we're going to go and we're going to figure out about 10 foot by 10 foot. So there's a few ways you can do this. You can use a tape measure. That's probably the easiest way. Now what I'm going to do is that's the start of a shingle right there. So I know that's about a foot and a half over, foot and a half. So I'm going to count. One shingle is typically between 36 and 40 inches, depending on the profile. There are a couple outside that range, but that's typical. So I'm going to assume this is 39. So if I've got 1, 2, 3 shingles, that puts me just a few inches under 10 feet. And so the edge of the shingle should be about here from where I'm feeling. So remember, we had a few extra inches there. So I'm going to take that over to where we were here. So if I dial this back to about here, it should be about 10 feet. So another way to count that is you could have counted the ridge all the way along, but that should be just about 10 feet. So we're going to double check our measurement. So add on about 3 inches there. 9. So I'm about, if I'm off by about an inch and a half. And so this would be your typical test square. Now what you're going to want to do is to figure out 10 feet down. And now here's a neat little trick on this shape of roof. You don't get to do this very often, but I'm actually going to go straight down from the corner there, down to here, and then straight over. You may be thinking to yourself, why? Well, to get 100 square feet, I'm going to need my height here to be 10 feet. So if we take our tape measure here, kind of doing this the hard way, I'm not sure why. So I'm slightly over 10 feet. And now that works out pretty well. Now this would be a standard test square. And so my goal would be to mark anything inside this test square to kind of get an idea of just how much damage there is. However, another type, sometimes called a quadrant or test grid, would be to divide this up into 6 sections. And so how we're going to do that is I'm going to label this section here. So as 1. Going to move over about the width of a shingle here. Label that 2. Width of a shingle here. Label that 3. So then we go down about halfway, and we're going to do the same thing. Now what's interesting is that some would want to label that 4 because it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Others want you to work clockwise. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And so for this particular scope, now there's a lot of reasoning behind this quadrant. However, most people don't really actively discuss what it is or tell anyone, and so it's not really well known. Some say that the reasoning is that a lot of carriers don't want you to mark twice in the same shingle, so they use those lines so that they can tell where one shingle should start and the next one should start. I'm not sure if that's true or not. I've also heard that some do this because when people see the grid, they're more likely to take extra photos. But overall, we have about a 10 foot by 10 foot 6-step grid. Some carriers use this, some carriers prefer a typical square. It really just depends on where you're at. Even some carriers don't even like to do it where you'll have one adjuster that wants it and another that doesn't. But those are your basic test squares for a shingle roof.